I found Emma Clancy's report to be incredibly fascinating and a very useful tool for the left, because it is one of the few reports of this kind to focus on the structural deficiencies and the structural dysfunctionalities of the Eurozone and of the European Union, rather than simply focusing on the bad policies that have been followed in these years by governments. The paper shows very well that it's not just about mistakes having been made by politicians or bad policies having been pursued. It's these policies were largely the outcome of what is a bias, pro-austerity, pro-deflation, pro-business bias that is inherent in the construction of the European Union and of the Eurozone in particular. It shows this very well. It reconstructs the history of the European Union and how we got to this place, and shows that there's a continuity between the various phases of European integration. So what we're going through now is not an accident. This was a long time in the making, and I think the paper forces us really to ask ourselves whether progressive reform of the European Union and of the Eurozone is possible, or whether we should be considering alternatives. The paper shows very convincingly that a progressive sort of Keynesian reform of the Eurozone would be practically almost impossible, and even more importantly, even if it were possible, would be undesirable from a democratic perspective, since it would take the decision-making process even further away from citizens and from people. And so I think it's a very good paper, and I think it's a great starting point for the left to start having a serious discussion about national sovereignty, about the capacity of the nation state, and about the true possibilities of reform within the Eurozone.
I think we need a debate on the future of the European Union and the Eurozone, and I think today's discussion was very useful. We heard a variety of contributions and fundamental questions about the future of the EU itself. I think the concept of social Europe is very important, but I think we also need to be very realistic that the configuration of political forces, the role of Germany and France at the moment in pushing for particular types of reforms, makes it difficult to see at this point how a social Europe can be delivered in any way that is meaningful. From an Irish perspective, I think that the opportunities are now there for us to enter that debate much more vigorously and to challenge particular assumptions, particularly in relation to monetary and fiscal policy, because the weight of monetary policy has been very much focused on a very narrow range of objectives. But really now this is a time for Europe to re-equip, to retool, to tackle unemployment, to tackle lack of access to quality employment right across the European Union. And that's where I think it's very important for progressives, for trade unions, for other civil society movements to work together in a collaborative way.
Well, today here in Dublin we launched a document, an economic discussion document called The Future of the Eurozone. Matt Carthy, the MEP, commissioned me to author it. I'm the Economics and Monetary Affairs Committee Advisor for GUI NGL. So I produced this document for a number of reasons. One is that I think the left in Europe and in Ireland has been very much focused on dealing with, responding and campaigning against austerity and against the policies of the EU and the Eurozone and the Troika. And that's absolutely vital, and we need to continue to do that. But the thing is that these policies didn't just happen after the crisis. There are serious structural design flaws in the Eurozone which enshrine austerity into the actual treaties, and this has been the case since the Maastricht Treaty of 1992. So the architecture of the Eurozone is actually a major problem because it makes trade imbalances and debt crises basically inevitable, and the model that has been adopted by the Eurozone has a deflationary bias because it basically allows the countries with a large current account surplus, like Germany, to export stagnation. So they're actually exporting their goods, but they're importing the demand from the other countries, and that's caused stagnation across the Eurozone, but it has also caused the debt crisis that we saw in 2010, and it will make future debt crises inevitable. So the purpose of this document is to move beyond just examining austerity and look at what changes need to happen in the fundamental core, the foundation of the Eurozone, in order to actually make it a currency union that works for ordinary people. And if that's impossible to achieve, then we need to actually go even further beyond that and look at the actual society that we want to build and how we can really build a social Europe, and whether the Eurozone infrastructure and architecture that we have today is able to allow us to do that. And at the moment, it certainly isn't.
So this document, The Future of the Eurozone, which we commissioned Matt Clancy, who works with us in Brussels, to write, is very comprehensive, and it sets out quite an amount of the arguments that I think particularly left and progressive people will have an interest in. But in reality, everybody who has an interest in the future economic direction, not only of Ireland but of the entire EU, should take the time to read. One of the reasons why I think that now is an apt time to have this conversation and for a document like this to be launched is because there's a story, an analysis that is becoming mainstream, that we're over the financial crisis of 10 years ago, and that now we're in a position to address some of the some of the new challenges, when the truth of the matter is that we haven't really addressed the real causes of the crisis, and in some ways we've actually just simply reinforced policies that were the cause of the crisis in the first place. So we see in Ireland, for example, now we're having a housing crisis, we have a crisis in terms of our health services, we have a crisis arguably in terms of all our public services. So what we wanted to do was set out the parameters in terms of the problems, and I think Emma has quite clearly said that. We also have outlined in this document some of the potential areas that we can address to resolve it. Now, the truth of the matter is that this is going to take much more than one document to address the huge structural problems that are in place. But what I hope will happen as a result of this document being launched, and hopefully people will read it, it will be up on my website, mattcarty.ie, in the next number of days. And what we're asking people to do is read it and engage in the conversation. This isn't a policy document, this isn't prescriptive, this is a discussion document. So we're asking people to do just that. Discuss it with your friends and families, with any organisations that you're involved in. And in particular, what I also hope to do is circulate this document around Europe, because this goes way beyond just the experiences of Ireland. Although what I do hope also it will do, will say to people right across Europe that Ireland isn't the poster child that our government or the European Union express it as. It simply has come through a very dark period in terms of the economic experience that we've had, and the truth of the matter is we haven't learned enough of the lessons that we were given. And unfortunately, our fear is that unless we actually sit up and take note of those lessons and start to implement the type of policies that are required, then we're simply going to repeat the mistakes of the past. So please have a read of the document, have that conversation with everybody who's willing to sit down and discuss it, and let's set out a way in which we can have a better and a fairer society here in Ireland and across the European Union.